Your follows tonight's Question Time.
Are too many people in this country off sick? The Prime Minister thinks we're suffering from what he calls a sick note culture. Is he right? And the government has finally got its Rwanda plan through. But if dying in the Channel isn't a deterrent, will being sent to Rwanda be? Tonight we're in Tottenham in North London, just down the road from the football stadium, in an area that's been solidly Labour since the 50s. But our local audience here is, as always, a broad reflection of the electoral picture across the country. Welcome to Question Time. On our panel tonight, as always, a wide range of views and interests. Chris Philp is from the government, where he's Minister for Police, Crime and Fire. After a successful business career, he was elected MP for Croydon South in 2015 and, according to his social media biog, still considers himself a serial entrepreneur. Labour's Wes Streeting speaks for his party on health and social care. He's been the MP for Ilford North, also since 2015. And at 41, he's already published his life story, So Far. Munira Wilson is a Liberal Democrat spokesperson on education. After training as a tax consultant and then a decade as a lobbyist, she became MP for Twickenham 5 years ago. Lord Victor Adebowale chairs the NHS Confederation, the membership body for all NHS organisations, often seen as the voice of the NHS leadership. He's also chaired commissions on policing, social enterprise and housing in London, and was one of the first so-called People's Peers appointed to the House of Lords over 20 years ago. And Lord Charles Moore is a columnist for both The Spectator and Daily Telegraph. He's previously been editor of both, as well as The Sunday Telegraph. He's also Margaret Thatcher's only authorised biographer. Good evening. Welcome to our panellists. Welcome to audience here in Tottenham. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home. You can join in the programme on social media. There's always a lively debate there. And you can also follow the programme on the iPlayer and on BBC Sounds, all sorts of different ways. Right, let's kick off with our first question, which is from Shelley Rahman.
Does Britain have a sick note culture and a lazy workforce?
So, the Prime Minister claimed this week, I think this is what you're referring to, Shelley, that Britain is suffering from a sick note culture and warned of over-medicalising normal worries. Shelley, can I just ask you, since you've asked this question, what's your view?
I just think it's quite rich for our billionaire Prime Minister to be making such a comment and not having sympathy for hard-working British people, and that doesn't offer any sympathy for people who have sickness and disabilities.
OK. Chris?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't put it in quite the terms that Shelley did in her question, but I would say we need to get more people back into work. Since COVID, there are about 850,000 people more on long-term sick. And that is a problem for the country because it means we're paying a lot more in benefits, but it's also a missed opportunity for the individuals concerned who can improve their own lives and build prosperity by getting into work. And the idea of the reforms and the changes that were announced last week was to just make sure we are doing everything we can to get people back into work, which is fair to taxpayers who are obviously paying the benefits bill. And by the way, the working age benefits bill is in the region of £100 billion a year. I mean, these are enormous, enormous sums of money. And I think as a country, we'll be economically healthier, but it's also better for the individuals, for their mental health and everything else, to be helped back into work. And that is the idea. That has to be the right thing to do, both for the individuals and for the country as a whole.
And the government wants GPs to no longer issue sick notes or fit notes, depending on what you want to call them, and wants sort of specialised health and work experts to do it. Who are these people?
Well, they'll be, I think, over time recruited. I think the concern is that, GPs...
But what will make them experts? How will they be experts?
Well, because obviously this is a very particular sort of specialisation. They'll be trained to identify what people can do, what they're able to do, rather than just sign them off as sick. And obviously GPs are under lots of pressure. As we all know, we'd rather they were seeing, patients, you or me. There is also a concern that GPs, being busy, being under pressure, might just, be a little bit too quick to sign off the sick note. So having someone who is specialised in that area and who can think about what the individual is able to do, what things can they do with their condition, is a slightly more constructive way to look at it, and that's what's behind the idea.
Gosh, there's a lot of hands up already. This is going to be interesting, but Wes, let me come to you first.
I don't think we have a sick note culture and a lazy workforce. I think we have a sickness problem and a lazy government. And I think only this Prime Minister, only this Prime Minister sat in number 10, looking at NHS waiting lists just south of 8 million, looking at mental health waiting lists that see 40,000 children in our country waiting over 2 years for treatment, and think that what we really need to do is sort out the bit of the system that gives them sick notes rather than sort out the bit of the system that keeps people waiting so long for treatment and care. And of course GPs are having a real problem at the moment with their workloads. And yes, I think it is true, and I've said myself in the past, that I think there are GPs who are dishing out sick notes without being able to see their patients in the way they'd want to because they've got an enormous backlog. Of course that's the case, because there are thousands fewer GPs than there were in 2015. But if we want to sort this problem out, and if we want to deal with the fact that the benefits bill is rising and people are off work and it's harming our economy, then let's deliver 2 million more appointments a year to cut NHS waiting lists with £1.1 billion, as Labour's committed to. Let's have mental health support in every school. Let's have mental health hubs in every community. Let's train 8,500 mental health support workers, as Labour has committed to do. Let's double the number of scanners so we could diagnose earlier and treat faster, as Labour has committed to do. If we can get people treated and back on their feet, we can get them back to work. But I'll just conclude by saying this, and it goes to the heart of the question, actually, and about this Prime Minister, and particularly what he says about mental health. He hasn't got the first clue what it is like to lie awake at night worrying about whether you can pay your rent, whether you can pay your mortgage, whether your home is going to be repossessed, whether you're going to be evicted, whether your kids are going to self-harm or attempt suicide. We haven't got the first clue. And I think we need a Prime Minister and a government that is in touch and has a record of delivering on the NHS, and that change can only come for a general election, and that general election cannot come soon enough.
So let me just ask you, because there are a number of pledges you've made, which you've made before in terms of doubling the number of district nurses, more health visitors, doubling the number of CT, MRI scanners, all that kind of thing. Labour said they were going to pay for that by abolishing the non-dom tax status. The government's stolen a march on you, has already said it's going to do that. So where is the money going to come from, all the things you've just listed? Well,
hang on. So when you say the government's stolen the march, the government went from saying, oh, no, not the poor old non-doms, and by the way, they'll leave and you'll never get the money in.
No, they took your idea. There's no doubt about that.
And they've said,
they took your idea, but nonetheless...
But anyway, let's move on.
That's how you were going to pay for all the things. How are you going to pay for them now?
Clamp down on tax avoidance and close the tax gap in our country, where we see far too many people not paying their fair share, who tend to be people who can afford to pay. That's the first thing.
The tax gap is the smallest it's ever been, Wes.
Close the gap.
As you know.
Close the loopholes enjoyed by private equity fund managers, because we think people need mental health treatment more than those people need tax breaks. I think when you look at Labour spending plans...
So is that going to raise enough money for all those things?
Yes, it will.
Those two things you've just cited?
Yes, it will, and not least because Rachel Reeves is going to put the resource into HMRC to make sure that we can go after people who are not paying their fair share of tax. And look, people can judge us now. You know, the Tories said before Labour's numbers aren't credible, but then they nicked Labour's tax-raising plans. So I think we can see who is credible, whose arguments are believable, and who can be trusted to make sure the right people are paying their fair share.
Man there in the jacket and tie, yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Fiona, and happy birthday. I think just to start off with...
OK, everybody, I'm 60 today. Let's just get that said. Oh, my goodness. Thank you.
To start off with, I think it's very unfair for the government to essentially pin the blame on the British people, as ultimately it's a systemic problem of long-term chronic austerity. And I think actually the government have also pretended that they are trying to fix a problem by deceivingly raising the national living wage, or otherwise known as the minimum wage. But of course it is businesses that ultimately pays this price. And I think, just on a wider note, I think Gen Z are actually quite keen to crack on and do well in life. They've seen what's worked and what's not. But it is this government that's presided over the most tax rises in any given parliamentary term, record tax burden, and I think we need to return to a way where it was fashionable to get on and do well, and ultimately cut the tax burden, because I think when you give humans freedom, they can actually achieve incredible things.
OK. Woman here in the yellow shirt, right in the middle there.
Hi. When you say that you're going to train experts and get them ready to be able to assess people, exactly what you're going to do? Because I have a client who was claiming disability benefits. He
Can I
hasn't been
say,
able
when
to...
you say have a client, what do you do?
Okay, I'm a nutrition and lifestyle coach. I help
Right.
people to improve their posture and well-being and intimate health. But I have a client who, I don't know how he injured himself, but he wasn't able to sit or stand for any long length of time for over 18 years. I've been with him when he's gone to have his assessment, and because he can stand for 4 minutes, he's deemed as being able to work. That's such a dangerous position. I've had to overturn his loss of income twice. I've managed to overturn it because somebody has used a piece of paper and ticked and said, well, he walked from the door to the monitor, so that means he's okay. He can stand, he can turn. He had a rucksack on his back, but it only had a bottle of water in it. How are you going to train these experts when, actually, for me to assess one client takes me about 8 hours? How are you going to really be able to assess these clients and actually say they're able to work? Because so many issues around mental, emotional well-being is post and pre-pandemic. It's as a result of the pandemic, on top of the result of let's change the way in which we're going to give people their benefits. Let's make them go to work. I don't think everybody doesn't want to work. People want to work, but you talk about prosperity. We want a job that takes us somewhere, not just something to tick a box and say,
all right.
we've got less people working.
Do you want to answer that quickly? Because I need to get around the rest of the time.
Look, I think
how are these specialists going to know what they're talking about?
Well, I think the account you gave there of someone who had a sort of 4-minute check exactly illustrates why more specialism is needed. And the question to get to is what can that person do constructively and realistically do? And that's where we need to get to. Just in response to the gentleman at the back with the purple tie.
Now, hang on a minute, before you move away from that. The point I think you're making, forgive me if I paraphrase you wrong and interrupt me if I do, is that you say it takes 8 hours to assess someone properly. That's just your opinion. Other people might feel differently, of course. And what she's saying is, how on earth are these people going to know better, either than GPs or people who've trained in this kind of in terms of assessing people for many years?
So the point is to have people who are properly trained in making these assessments. You're obviously very specialist in your particular area of, I think you said, nutrition and posture. We need to make sure the people doing these assessments, rather than being generalist GPs that have 100 other things to worry about, are specialists in understanding what a particular individual with particular circumstances, maybe mental health, could be physical health, what are they realistically able to do? That is the kind of question we need to get to. But I do want to just pick up this point. The fact that minimum wage has gone up from a derisory £5.93 an hour under the last Labour government up to £11.44 now is very significant. And on the point you made about austerity, I mean, the NHS budget, £165 billion, is higher than it's ever been in history by some margin. 40,000 extra doctors, 70,000 extra nurses since the last Labour government left office. Waiting lists are now falling and have been for 5 months in a row. I mean, look, huge amounts of extra in resources and investment have gone in. Huge amounts of extra resources have gone in, and we are now beginning to see the results after what has obviously been a very difficult period.
Well, look, we've got
a doctor's strike.
We've got the head of the NHS Confederation here, so Victor, you might have a view on this. Let's hear your view on that, but also the question: does Britain have a sick note culture with a lazy workforce?
No. I think, look, I mean, I'm getting on a bit, right? You're 60, I'm 62. I've got 2 years on you, right? And
it's so great that everyone knows I'm 60 now.
We all know.
Anyway.
You look good, though.
Thank you very much. Thank you, my workout. I'm feeling terrible. I've got a cold. Yeah, you look pretty cool as well. But honestly, if you can set your watch, I kind of groan. There's an election coming. The government gets tired. They're casting around for something to say that's going to keep the base or generate some energy about something. It usually involves having a go at somebody, right? And the language that we use, it gets used again, even in the question, do we have a sick note culture? It's cruel. You know it. You know it. If you're at home and the number that you use, Chris, 870,000 people. Well, 2 million people have got long COVID. It's a recognised illness as a result of the COVID. So let's just be clear about what we're talking about here. I've very rarely met someone who doesn't want to work and doesn't want help to work. For every month you're out of work, your mental health deteriorates, but measurable mental health, anxiety and depression scores. You need help to regain confidence, to build the skills, retain the skills, and you might go back to different work. When somebody says sick note culture, When somebody says that you need specialists, what people have got, and your question was very pertinent, what people have got to used to thinking is that it doesn't mean an additional investment in occupational therapists. That's not what you're talking about. And nobody believes that's what you're talking about. What they think you're talking about is somebody who works for the DWP or the private sector company who's measured by the ability to beat you back into a job, which is not the same thing. Looking at the NHS, my members tell me 41% of NHS staff went in to feel unwell at any one point, right? 54% went into work while feeling unwell. 34% are emotionally exhausted, and you all know what that feels like, right? 30% are burnt out. 57%, however, think the NHS actually does quite a good job, and I'm really pleased that NHS England have continued the support, the professional support for professionals that work in the NHS. So we need to do this. We need to stop using this performative language. You know, Rishi knows better. He does. You know, he runs the country. It doesn't matter about a billionaire. Bit of empathy, bit of kindness, bit of understanding. Talk to people. People want to work. Let's work with those people, give them the support they need and the time that they need, and they'll work. But let's not beat people, let's not be cruel, and let's not waste money. And there's no point saying, right, we're spending 100 billion quid, so therefore we've got to be cruel to a section of the community. That
No one's talking about being cruel. No one's saying that.
It's not, well, it's what it sounded like. It's what it sounded like. And what it sounded like when Rishi used those terms. And I noticed when you said to Shelley, I wouldn't put it like that, that's exactly how the Prime Minister put it. Yeah. So can we just wind our neck in? Let's understand how people actually live and give people actual support.
Charles Moore.
Well, I think Victor puts it eloquently, but I think something is being missed here, which is really this question of mental health. If you get, the fact of the matter is that if you get a sick note, that usually means you're off work, and as a result, and that is basically very, very bad for mental health. Of course, there are a lot of people who cannot work because of their mental health problems, but it would be a very odd idea if you're helping mental health by getting everybody off work. And one of the problems with the National Health Service, I think, is that it's actually very ill-adjusted to the question of mental health. It's much better on physical health, and it's rather behind the curve on mental health. And I think it's very, very hard. And, you know, I've known people well who've experienced this. And if you think of what they went through with COVID, why did COVID have such a bad effect on people? One, because they got it, if they did, but also because of mental health afflictions related to it. And one was fear of COVID, and the other was not being able to work properly.
Charles,
and therefore, I think it is very important to think through what we're doing when we're signing people off all the time for mental health. And it cannot be the case that, for example, I believe the increased diagnosis of ADHD is 50% in the last 6 months. Now, there's something funny about that. It's not really a believable statistic. And I think that what we need to think about here is how actually do we address this mental health problem? And in this respect, I agree very much with what's been said about the Prime Minister's wrong language about this, but I think the issue is an important one, and I think that it's not satisfactorily served by a GP who inevitably does have very few minutes to say, OK, you've got a mental health problem, and therefore you can have a sick note. And I know from many people I know who've gone through this that one of the things GPs mostly do about mental health is just prescribe pills. And again, it's a problem of time. And I think we do need to really get into this rather than... I mean, most of this discussion has been political so far. I think it shouldn't be.
It's not political. I'm really...
OK, briefly, because I need to get...
No, but we just need to correct something. One of the good things that Rishi Sunak has actually done, this government has done, is increase spending on mental health interventions, the IAP programme. So actually, when you go to your doctor, it's just as likely that you're going to be sent to increase access to Talking Therapies programme. So we just need to be clear. I think it's a caricature to say that doctors just hand these things out. I'm sure you heard what I was saying, and what I said was that for every... I did talk about mental health. For every
Yes,
1
you did,
month
yeah.
someone's unemployed, the mental health, there is an increased access to mental health. Doctors do... I think it's a little unfair just to caricature what doctors do. The reality is they do a range of things, and actually they would tell you they need more of them and more time to do
No,
that.
I'm not. Please, I'm not criticising
Let's not
doctors
use
for this. I'm talking about the amount of time that is devoted to this,
I understand.
and it's a real difficulty.
Let me hear a little bit more from yours, and then I'll come to you. Yes, woman there in the glasses.
Yeah, I'm getting a bit anxious here with regards to this question, this debate. I'm actually a mental health nurse that works in this area, and I trained to do mental health work. So you'll get one client of a family that you're working with and you end up with the whole family. Yeah. Because as part of my job, we have to be holistic. Yeah. So you'll find out that there's housing issues. Yeah. You'll find out that there's poverty. You'll find out that there's no childcare, etc. So what's happening in mental health is that we are becoming housing officers. Yeah. We are becoming social workers. Yes. We are doing all the jobs that GPs cannot handle because there's not enough of them and they're not able to cope. So this idea, what Rishi Sunak has, I feel very insulted that he's speaking that way, and it is true, we do have to bring in this billionaire kind of lifestyle that really he isn't really in touch with. And regards to what you're saying, sir, from the Federation, I'm very happy to hear that you're here today, and it's touched that you're here today because I feel supported by that, because myself here, especially in this area of Tottenham and Edmonton, where there's so much needed to be done, how can you expect one person to be trained to do something that you obviously don't understand what mental health is? You obviously don't understand the remit of what is going on in this world and what can cause things and what can cause someone who's working perfectly well to crash.
Okay. No, we hear what you say. Can I just ask? Listen, I'm going to do this in the interest of balance. Is there anyone who either has some sympathy with or agrees with what the Prime Minister is trying to do in terms of, you've had the Prime Minister, you also had Mel Stride from the government talking about perhaps we're over-medicalising, perhaps normalised conditions. I mean, these are not my words, but this is something that they have claimed. Well, can I just ask, do you agree with the Prime Minister?
Nothing the government is doing. One, I'm disabled. I've got 2 broken shoulders. I've been homeless for 8 months. I've had people like him saying that people need to go and see these medical therapists. Do you know Atos Healthcare? You probably heard of it. You discriminated it, and then, because it was useless, and then you put it back in. Why did you do that?
So you're criticising that particular company, is that what you're doing?
I was criticising the government because they put the company back in.
Right.
Atos Healthcare.
Okay, I mean,
you know what I'm talking about.
I must just point out Atos Healthcare are not here to defend their record, clearly.
But the government, and I want to talk about Tottenham, because this is where we're talking about, and Haringey. Haringey is depreciating. I've been waiting 8 months to just get housed. I'm disabled, I've got Crohn's disease, right? Dear. I've got 2 metal shoulders, right? And they say I'm non-AP. Do you know what that means? Anyone?
No.
Oh, God, see, I'm not a priority. A priority. Thank you.
You're not a priority, that's what they're
telling you. I'm not a priority.
Okay. All right, well, listen, we hear what you say. Thank you for your contribution.
And this is why Haringey Council is despicable. And this is Tottenham talking.
Munira.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about your situation, and Frank, it sounds like you quite rightly should be a priority. But to answer Shelley's question directly, the answer is no. And frankly, those comments were an insult not just to my constituents, but millions of people up and down the country. I don't know if Chris has knocked on doors recently or spoken to his constituents, given some of the comments that he made. I certainly find when I'm going around, given the cost of living crisis, where people can, they're working not just 1 job, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, so that they don't have to choose between heating and eating. Right. And for those who can't work, they desperately want to work, but they're stuck on those NHS waiting lists that Wes has referred to. Now, Liberal Democrats have said we need to fix the front door and the back door to the NHS, and that means, with regards to GPs, having a GP guarantee that you can see a GP within 7 days, and that means hiring another 8,000 GPs. That doesn't happen overnight, but there are lots of different ways we can try and get people back into the workforce and train new GPs. But we've also talked about public health, and actually one of the things that we need to do is help people to stay well better. Now, we've had a lot of discussion about mental health, and I very much agreed with the mental health nurses' comments that actually the issues behind mental health are really complicated, housing and poverty and so on. But also, Liberal Democrats have said what people need at various points in their life when they're particularly vulnerable to having mental health issues is having a mental health MOT. So we take a preventative approach to health and not just treating people all the time. And then you've got to fix the back door that is social care, because if you're disabled or if you're very ill and frail and you need social care, we can't relieve the hospital beds by discharging into social care. We know that social care is absolutely broken. We need to increase the salary that we give to care workers so that we can tackle the workforce shortages there. And we need a cross-party group to come together after the next election to fix the social care problem, the thing that Boris Johnson promised on the steps of Downing Street in 2019 to fix. And also, we've got millions of unpaid carers who are having to look after those people who can't look after themselves. And they are desperate to work and they can't work, and their mental health is being affected. And just this week, it was exposed that many of those unpaid carers who'd been wrongly overpaid by the DWP are having thousands of pounds worth of money clawed back when they're already living in a huge amount of poverty. And that caused the government's dementia czar to quit over these actions the government's taking. If they had an ounce of empathy and sympathy for what these people are going through, they would call an amnesty on that and make sure that we are supporting our unpaid carers, because without them, the NHS and our social care system would fall over.
Right, OK. I'm going to take another question. There's lots that you all want to discuss tonight, as I saw all the questions that you submitted as you arrived. I just want to let you know, before we do, let you know at home that next week we're in Cambridge and the following week we are in Stoke. So if you'd like to come and be part of the audience for either of those programmes, go to the Question Time website. You can follow the instructions there. And incidentally, the list of all our locations up until July, I think, are being listed on that website. So have a look and see if any of them are near where you live, and we'd love to see you. Right, our next question is from Priya Naga Martin.
Hi, if the threat of death is not a deterrent, why will Rwanda be?
So, of course, the Safety of Rwanda Bill was passed on Monday night. It took 2 years, but it got through on Monday night. Wes?
I don't think it is going to work. I think we've spent £250 million already without a single flight taking off. Even if it achieves Rishi Sunak's bar of success, we're talking about 1% of small boat arrivals going to Rwanda, tune of about £2 million per person. And thinking back to the last question, I think there are quite a few people around here with like £2 million a year to get by and would make quite a life-changing difference. I think that the fact we had to change the law to declare Rwanda a safe country when the courts had looked at the evidence and concluded otherwise makes a mockery of Parliament. I think the fact that we still see people coming over and dying in the Channel, at the same time they're being smuggled by criminal gangs who are making a tidy profit out of human misery and suffering and exploitation, is a disgrace. The fact we've got so many people in this country today who've come here seeking refuge, who are unable to work and participate and contribute to the country that's taken them in and they want to be part of, because their claim hasn't been processed and no decision's been made. I think the whole system is a mess. And, when you've got everyone from Labour and the Liberal Democrats through to Nigel Farage saying this scheme is not going to work, it is not going to be a deterrent, and even the Prime Minister himself, when he was Chancellor, opposing the scheme in Cabinet because he didn't think it would work. The fact we've spent so much time and so much public money on a gimmick is an absolute disgrace, especially when money is so scarce and the people we're talking about, yes, there'll be some people taking the mick, there always are, but we're talking about people who have fled suffering, torture, misery, and are in a desperate situation that none of us would ever wish to be. And having seen some of those people in my constituency advice surgery, desperate to participate, desperate to be part of this country, desperate to build a new life, and they are demonised in the way that we've seen, with ugly rhetoric from people like Suella Braverman, who is still a Conservative MP, even though she associates with the far right across Europe, I think is an absolute disgrace, and it's a shame on our politics.
Chris.
Look, I think it's essential that we stop these boat crossings. There's a number of reasons. Firstly, they are dangerous. We saw 5 people dying earlier this week, including a young girl. Those aren't the first deaths. Secondly, these crossings are unnecessary because France is a safe country. Nobody needs to flee war in France. The people crossing are those who are able to pay people smugglers. They are almost entirely young men. And there are other people that we would want to welcome. Families, children, people with vulnerabilities, people that come from more dangerous places, as we have done, welcoming people directly from Syria, Afghanistan and Ukraine, for example. So we do have to stop these boats, which are dangerous and unnecessary. Now, the question was, will the programme, the Rwanda plan, actually work? And there are 2 examples, 2 case studies that I can give in support of the hypothesis that it will act as a deterrent. The first of those is in Australia, about 10 years ago. They had a very similar problem, people crossing from, I think it was Indonesia. They implemented a programme called Operation Sovereign Borders, very similar in principle to the Rwanda scheme, and very quickly their illegal maritime arrivals that were about the same level as ours went down to 0. Now, they didn't have to ship 50,000 people somewhere for the deterrent effect to work. It was a relatively small number before the deterrent effect kicked in. Now, let me give you a second example. In 2022, the most numerous nationality crossing the Channel was for people from Albania, which obviously is, generally speaking, not a dangerous country. We reached a returns agreement with the Albanian government where people who came across got returned to their home country, Albania. And very quickly, the number of Albanian people crossing the Channel went down by 95%. So those 2 examples, Australia and the recent Albanian example here, shows how the deterrent effect works. And if we can stop this illegal trade run by people smugglers who are exploiting the vulnerable, then we'll have capacity, more capacity, to help people in most need. Now, we've done that already by taking people directly from Afghanistan, directly from Syria and directly from Ukraine and Hong Kong, let's not forget, people in genuine need. What we can't do is have people entering the country dangerously, illegally, from a safe place, namely France. Nobody needs to flee war in France. There is no war going on in France.
We're an island, yeah?
Let me ask you, because I'm sure nobody here and nobody at home wants to see people die in the Channel. I mean, that is a given. I just wonder how much public support do you think there is for the Rwanda policy?
Well, this is, I think, about... I haven't seen polling on it. I think it is, in some places, pretty popular. But this isn't about trying to get popularity. This isn't about... This is not... Hang on, this policy is about trying to do the right thing to make sure that people are not undertaking these dangerous... We've seen they're dangerous. People have died this week. We have to stop these crossings completely, and we have to concentrate our resources on helping those people in most need, which is not, generally speaking, young men, young single men, paying people smugglers.
OK. The woman there in the cap,
You mentioned the Australia scheme and the scheme to send people back to Albania. The places that they were sending those migrants are not unsafe countries, or in the same way that Rwanda is. So morally, how can you justify sending migrants who have come to Britain looking for a safe place to live? How can you justify sending them to a country that is not confirmed to be safe?
Are you saying that Albania is not safe?
No.
No, I'm saying that Chris said that Albania is a safe country and it's not a dangerous country. So sending migrants back there...
It's not the same as sending people to Rwanda, that's the point you're making.
OK, Chris, Rwanda is, in our view, a safe country. I mean, the UNHCR themselves... the UN High Commission on Refugees themselves send refugees to, guess where? Rwanda. The UNHCR send people there. The court found, the High Supreme Court...
But they can then be resettled in other countries, including Europe.
And to be clear, the court case in the autumn, there was a particular reason they said that they were unhappy with Rwanda, and it was to do with the risk that Rwanda... Not that Rwanda was in itself unsafe. The court had a concern about Rwanda sending people elsewhere, some other country that might not be safe. And so that's why, I think actually today, we've ratified a new treaty with Rwanda confirming that in relation to people that go from the UK to Rwanda, that will not happen. There is a treaty obligation on Rwanda not to do that, and that directly addresses the concern raised by the Supreme Court.
There's probably going to be quite a few questions for you, Chris. I'm just going to go around quite a few people in the audience. Yes, man here in the white T-shirt, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount wrong with this policy and the whole idea of it. But I'll come to two things. The first thing is the money that's been spent. It's a huge waste of taxpayers' money. And if I could, I would withdraw my consent for my taxpayers' money to be used in that way. I think it's morally reprehensible. And then that brings me on to the next point, which is the language and the rhetoric around this. I think we need to bring humanity back into this discussion. And when I speak to friends that live overseas and meet people from overseas, I'm actually embarrassed by the reputation that my country has around this. And that message transcends borders, and people hear what we have to say. And I think we should bring some more positivity and humanity back to the debate.
OK. Man in the... you've got grey zip top on, yeah.
Yeah, what's his name? Chris?
This is Chris, yes.
Yeah, Chris.
Chris Philp.
I come from a neighbouring country called Congo, if you know geographically, that it's located right next door to Rwanda. And right now in Goma, there's a genocide going on, and there's such a big conflict going on with people from Rwanda. So had my family members come from Goma on a crossing right now, would they then be sent back to the country that they're supposedly warring, Rwanda? Does that make any sense to you?
No, I think there's an exclusion on people from Rwanda being sent to Rwanda.
They're not from Rwanda, they're from Congo.
They're from Congo.
And
they're
supposedly warring these people from Rwanda. Are they then going to be sent to Rwanda if they came here on a crossing?
From
Congo? Yeah.
Would people be sent from... Well, I mean, Rwanda is a different country of Congo, isn't it? It's a different country.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Definitely.
He's saying if they come from a war zone in Congo, would they then be sent to Rwanda? That's the point he's making.
So there is a clause in the legislation that says if somebody would suffer, I think the phrase is serious and irreversible harm by being sent somewhere, they wouldn't be sent. So there is that safety mechanism built into the legislation.
Charles.
Just the questioner there raised the point about the safety of Rwanda. I have been to Rwanda. I was involved in a charity there which did a lot of good work. And I must say that though it certainly doesn't have a sort of unblemished reputation, it is actually quite an orderly and well-run country, which I think shouldn't be despised. I think people looking down, they think, oh, it's a sort of primitive African country. I don't think that's true. And I think that's an important point to make. Another point I think should be made is that one must also speak up for the rights of people who live in this country. I feel great sympathy for the people who wish to cross, but it's not right. It's not right for them, and it's not right for us, for illegal immigrants to come in large numbers. It's wrong. And we also have a very big problem with legal migration as well. We had, I think, net 640,000 people come in last year. That's massive, and it's very hard to deal with. It puts enormous strain on social services, and it is the right of the elected parliament to make a decision about this. And sitting in the House of Lords as all this went through and we were all debating it, I moved more to the supporting the bill than I had to start with, because I thought it was not right for us in the Lords to go against the elected MPs in the Commons, and I thought it was not right for judges to be the ultimate arbiters of this. This is a matter for a democratic parliament. And if a democratic parliament wants to do this in defence of the rights of citizens, it must be able to do that. And that's why, in the end, the Lords finally did give in, and I think we were right to do so. Please, let's have some proportion about this. This is not... there is a very, very strong need to stop illegal migration. And if we get it right, which we may well not, I admit, then if people don't go on these boats, that'd be fantastic. It'd be fantastic for them, their safety, and it'd be better for Britain.
OK. Munira, to Charles's point, that we need to do something to stop illegal migration.
Absolutely. I think we're all agreed. Nobody wants to see these dangerous channel crossings take place. And let's not forget, this week, a 7-year-old girl died in the Channel. Now, I'm a mother to 2 children under the age of 10, and I can't even begin to imagine having to make that decision, what kind of threat or conditions that you're having to live in, that you would take that risk with your child's life. And that tells you that the Rwanda policy is not going to be a deterrent, because if, as a parent, you're prepared to put your child's life in danger by crossing in a dinghy the Channel, then clearly it's not going to be a deterrent. And if the government think it's a safe country, then it won't be a deterrent. And if they think it's an unsafe country, then it's an outrageous thing to do to insist that that those coming across on these boats should be sent there. This has been a colossal failure. £241 million of taxpayers' money has been wasted on what is essentially policy by press release, because we're heading into an election and Rishi Sunak thinks this might help him win a few votes when he's plummeting in the polls. That £241 million, we've just been talking about accessing GPs and getting healthcare. £241 million would have paid for 5.7 million GP appointments. Or it could have paid for 6,000 Home Office caseworkers to clear the 128,000 asylum backlog. And actually, if we had a system that worked efficiently, processed people quickly, and sent those back who weren't entitled to be here, that would be a far bigger deterrent. And 3/4 of those who have come over in boats are actually coming from places like Afghanistan, because we haven't kept our commitments there to allow in people who have helped the UK and the US. And I had a case in my surgery just a couple of weeks ago about somebody who worked with the US and UK forces and as an interpreter and had his application rejected. I'm working with my constituent to help him, help his friend who is been tortured by the Taliban, is now in hiding and separated from his family. So we need more safe and legal routes and to keep our promises to the Afghan people. But the problem is the government doesn't want to focus on the mundane tasks of fixing the backlog and sorting out those safe and legal routes, because this is an election-grabbing headline. Well, frankly, the people are fed up of it, and it's time. We just had a general election.
Victor.
Well, you know, I'm always intrigued by... I was listening to Charles and others. I'm always intrigued by when people who are members of the House of Lords or members of the government say, I've been to Rwanda and it's perfectly safe. I mean, when you get off the... if I got off the plane in Rwanda, I'm sure it'd be perfectly safe. You know, decent hotel, you know, gin and tonic at 5 o'clock. But I'll tell you what, I won't want to live there. And I'll tell you why I won't want to live there. Because my gay friends couldn't come and visit me. Because, as that chap, there's still skirmishes on the borders with other countries, which means it's not safe, right? It's just not safe. And because you've been there, and you think it's serious, you think it's safe to send... I just think that's nonsense. I'll just be very honest with you. I think the examples that you gave, you know, there is something... Policies that are cruel might work, but they're still cruel, and we shouldn't be doing them. And by the way, the conditions that Australia sends those people to on an island off the coast are appalling. They're actually appalling. So let's just be clear about that. I also think that, look, there are 60-odd million people in this country. By and large, right, we are kind, good people. We know that because we've just taken thousands of Ukrainians in, plus thousands of people from Hong Kong Chinese, right? So we know that. We also know that there are places and people where cruelty is popular. You, the government, should not be supporting that on that basis. You know it's cruel. There are 3 things about this thing which are wrong. The first is, this is a country of law, and yes, you're right, we have got a democracy in the government that leads us under law, right? And it was High Court judges that said that Rwanda was unsafe. Not some think tank or a couple of people behind it. It was the High Court. They said it was unsafe, and then, in order to respond to that, the government said, we think it's safe. It's a bit like the government saying, we're going to legislate against gravity because it's inconvenient. To which my response is, take you to the top of Victoria Tower, you jump first. So I just think it's nonsense. Then there's the cost, and I'll just give you a number. Doing the sorts of things that Munira suggested that are like common sense, boring, common sense, doable and would work, would cost about £53,000 per person, right? Doing it the government's way costs £233,000 per person, right? Some of these people, quite rightly, could be helping you, could be helping you, could be helping you, could be helping you, because they want to work. And what we do know is that actually, this economy, the NHS, was built by people who came over as migrants. And I do feel offended on behalf of my parents, who have never taken a penny. God rest his soul, my dad and my mum are still alive. Never taken a penny from this country. My mum worked 40-odd years in the NHS. And I know, and she knows, what people mean when they start talking about too many immigrants.
Yeah. All right, Charles, do you want to come in and answer before I...
You know. And I just think that this policy is cruel. Full stop, it's just cruel. Okay. It's unworkable, it's unsafe, and it will not deter people, because they know there's very little chance of them getting on a plane.
Charles.
What I think Victor's missing is that the present circumstances are cruel. It's very, very cruel that this system is this great big business model of crooks sending people across boats to a very, in very uncertain future. That's cruel. And it's pretty difficult when they get here, because if you ever have very large numbers of people arriving, it's very hard to look after them properly.
Really?
Even in a rich country. That is a serious
Hang on, Charles, sorry. And look, you know something that really gets me? The fact of the matter is, there's a way of talking about this. Human beings live together for thousands of years. It's always been difficult, right? Always been difficult. What makes it more difficult is when we get the kind of performative language that suggests that you should live in fear of people that don't look like you, people have come from a different place. You started it. No, I would rather that you actually talked about hope. You gave people examples, of which there are millions, of the benefits of migration. Right. The actual fact that your family, people on this panel, you go back far enough, all of us have come from somewhere.
Well, Victor, let Charles answer. I need to take on another topic as well.
Have that performative language.
It's not performative. I think it's very difficult to take in a very large number of people at any one time. Particularly if they're not legal. And apart from anything else, if there's a queue, they're jumping it. And that is a serious problem. It's not good that we have 45,000 people in hotels. And you can't say, oh, well, this is easily answered.
Let me deal with that issue.
Hang on.
Please, Victor, I think you're being rude and unfair to people who have absolutely genuine worries about this situation.
I'm not. I accept the worry.
Because you're saying this language is performative.
It is performative.
Really, when you're talking about too many immigrants, you're saying something dark and unkind. It's not.
It is performative. And I've given you an example.
Hang on,
it's not true.
I hear what you're saying, but let Charles answer as well.
Every country in the world needs to be concerned about the level of immigration. It doesn't mean that immigration is all bad. Of course it doesn't mean that. But it is a serious concern. It's become a more serious concern. And I'm rather dismayed that that point is not really being discussed tonight. I think it's really, really important, and it will be really important, I think, at the election.
And I'd add one more point. It's also reasonable for any country to have some kind of control. So we can debate this and we can agree or disagree about how much or little immigration we think is right. But it should be for the democratic parliament to decide that, and not for people illegally entering the country paying people smugglers. We can agree who we need to come here to
go
work,
after the people smugglers.
which we're doing. Obviously, Wes, we're doing that.
It'd be so much better if you put the money from Rwanda, if you put it into a proper cross-border crime and policing to tackle the criminal gangs.
As I get a letter every week, a classified letter from the NCA, I can tell you that the National Crime Agency, a very large proportion of their top operations are directed against the gangs. Obviously, that's happening. But we do need to have control over who doesn't come here, both to work, legally to come here and work, which we obviously value, but controlled. We'll decide who meets the criteria. And for humanitarian purposes, we should decide, the government and the public here, who should come in. And we've been very generous with Ukraine, 200,000 people. Hong Kong. Afghanistan, 25,000 people. Syria, 25,000 people. It should be based on need, not based on mostly young men paying people smugglers, leaving a manifestly safe country, France.
OK, listen, I know loads of you...
Hang on, Munira. Island, you can't get here without crossing the channel.
You don't need to come to France, it's safe.
Listen, hang on a minute.
OK,
hang on a minute. We've got 10 minutes left. We've only done 2 questions. So So, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to move on to another question. Not because this isn't worth debating, because it really is, and I can tell how passionately you feel about it. But you asked about other questions as well, and I'm going to try and shoehorn one more in. I was going to try and get 4 in. I'm clearly going to get to 3. So, and I'm sure as eggs is eggs, we will revisit this topic. So, forgive me, I'm going to move on to Ryan. Brian Wiggins. There you are.
The most recent statistics suggest there are over 30,000 unused properties across London. With increasing rents and property ownership a pipe dream, how will you solve London's housing crisis and give young people like me the security you had?
So, Ryan, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
24.
24. Yeah. And have you any idea when you think you might be able to own a property of your own?
No. It's a dream. Yeah, it's a dream at the moment.
OK. Munira.
Well, thank you for your question, Ryan. As a London MP, obviously, I hear from young people like you desperate to either get on the housing ladder or even just be able to afford to rent somewhere. And not least, I see every week in my surgery families living in desperately overcrowded and unsuitable accommodation. It's not a housing crisis, it's a housing emergency. And yes, as you say, there are many unused properties that we need to try and bring back into use, and there should be policies in place that allow the mayor to be able to try and get those homes back into use. But also there are commercial properties, particularly in different parts of the city, that frankly are not viable anymore because of the way we're all working now, that could be brought into use. But to protect renters in particular and the rising levels of people who are being made homeless, we should be scrapping the Section 21 no-fault eviction notices immediately. And yes, we discussed it in Parliament just yesterday, but the delay after delay, this government made that commitment back in 2019 in its manifesto. 5 years later, dragged kicking and screaming, they've brought it to the House of Commons and now they've watered it down. It's outrageous. Last year I was contacted by a father who had 2 very ill children, and he was being threatened with eviction because he dared to fix a leak that was causing mould that was making his children's illness worse. And just on the point about trying to boost housing supply so that young people like you can get on the housing ladder, we need to reform our planning system so that when developers get planning permission, they use that planning permission or they lose it and then somebody else can build houses there. We need to use our brownfield sites better, as well as things like the Transport for London and Network Rail have got a lot of disused land that we should be building houses on. We should be prioritising social housing because that will get everything moving, the private rental sector and also homes to buy. And I've been leading a campaign to make sure that when the public sector sells off assets, that they are prioritised for homes that are affordable for young people like you.
All right, we've got about 8 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you all to be pretty brief. Wes?
When I was growing up in a council flat in East London in the 1980s, I used to think I was really unlucky. And mates in my primary school from wealthier families had nicer homes and I could really see the difference. And now when I look at my housing casework, I realise just how lucky I was, because kids like me, growing up in poverty in our city today, they don't have a council flat. They're being pushed from pillar to post in temporary accommodation, bed and breakfast, bed sits. It is horrific. And I'm proud of the fact that London's Mayor, Sadiq Khan, is building more council homes now than at any point since the 1970s. We've got to go further and faster. We are not going to tackle the housing crisis unless we build more homes, because that is where the crux of the housing crisis is. And a range of homes. Homes that people can buy, homes that people can rent, and genuinely affordable council homes too. And that's our ambition. And I think there's lots of things we need to do to unlock some of the land, particularly, I mean, I've got lots of green belt in my constituency, I'm proud of it, but let's be honest, there are patches of what we call grey belt in the green belt, bits of disused land where, you know, some new homes or it would make a real difference.
Wes,
that's the level of ambition we need to get 1.5 million more homes built over the course of the next Parliament, so kids have a decent home to call their own.
Well, to help Ryan and hundreds of thousands of people like Ryan into a home, I mean, I do agree with Wes, the point is we need to build more. Now, Sadiq Khan's record in London on this is terrible. He has missed his own housing targets by an average of 15,000 a year. It's one of Sadiq Khan's many failures, the others including knife crime and goodness knows what else.
The government's missed its own housing targets nationally.
Well, I mean, the total number of housing starts and completions is considerably higher now than it was when Labour left office 14 years ago. But Khan has missed his targets. We need to build more on brownfield, certainly. Creative use of public land. For example, I represent Croydon in Parliament. East Croydon Station, at some point, is going to be remodelled. We should be building 25 storeys on top of East Croydon Station to create apartments. I've supported essentially brownfield development in my constituency. There was a Victorian hospital on top of a hill, disused. It's just on the edge of London, just as kind of Croydon turns into the countryside. And we've built, I supported it, 600 homes, a place called Cane Hill, 600 homes on that kind of brownfield site. By bringing forward supply creatively in the way I was describing, we can get to this. Just two other points. I'd like to see, we've already cut stamp duty for younger people, and I'd like to see us go further on stamp duty. The final point is that when we give planning permission, you get this concept of different sort of forms of affordable home, like social housing and whatnot. I'd like to see more of those designated as they're called either first homes or starter homes, which means they're reserved for first-time buyers at a discount, for example, 20 or 30% discount to market value. Okay. So a combination of those things, I think, could, Ryan, help you and obviously many other people like you onto the housing ladder.
Okay,
I really want
to
see that happen.
Because we are so nearly out of time. Charles, forgive me.
Yeah, it got bankrupt by Labour, you're right. Labour bankrupted. No,
hang on, wait, because we've got two people on the panel who need to have their views heard.
If the government gets rid of no-fault evictions, lots and lots of landlords will withdraw from the market and rents will go up. That's the reality of the situation. So, because, of course, why would you want to rent out if you can't get your property back? The Tory government is being very bad in another way on this, which is that because it's frightened in its rural constituencies, it's not allowing free enough development. And you desperately need massive development to all over the country, and not just in grey belt, Wes, I would say, but in greenfield sites as well, to allow... The only way house prices can drop is if there are more houses. And at present is very, very strictly controlled. So the other day, there was a great row because the Duchy of Cornwall proposed a whole new town in Kent. I thought it was a beautiful idea, a much better idea, because if you plan a town, you can have proper facilities, proper all the rest of it. And this is the future, and we need much more of it. And nobody seems to understand this.
Victor.
We need to do the following things. Scrap the no-fault eviction because it's a net cause of eviction. That's the problem. It's a net cause, and worry, which ends up on the door of my members. We need to do better deals with public land. So at the moment, it's possible there are deals happening with public land, hospital land, that's creating key worker accommodation for nurses and doctors. We need to do more of that at scale. I do wonder, and nobody talks about this, but in some countries they have rent controls and they don't have a shortage of social housing. So I do wonder that. I know the free market and all that, but actually there's no such thing as a free market. Somebody always pays. I also wonder whether we should do something. My wife's a health visitor, and she gets a lot of people, health coach rather, and she gets a lot of people who come to her with really serious illnesses caused by poor housing conditions. And I do wonder whether the NHS should treat those conditions, but then send the bill to the landlord. Because I think it would bring... And the final thing we need to do is actually stop calling affordable housing when it isn't.
OK. All right. Victor, thank you. And listen, I'm sorry because there's lots of hands up and I haven't been able to bring on you, so forgive me. We spent a long time talking about Rwanda and I did want to try and get this in, but we had precious little time to do it. Our hour is up. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to all of you coming along here in Tottenham. And also thank you to David Howard, who supplied these pictures that you can see of where we are this evening. That's it from us here for Question Time. We will be in Cambridge next week. See you then. Bye-bye.
Final day, boundaries taking, accelerating.
England go mark.